Hello everybody, it's Colin Ellis here and welcome to another Culture and Coffee podcast for Monday the 14th of February 2022. That's right friends, it is St. Valentine's Day. What a nonsense that is. Oh sorry, do you celebrate it? Or did you get flowers? Really expensive flowers? Have you got a really expensive booking at a restaurant tonight? That sounds so cynical. I mean, but it is really, isn't it? Like men listening, like if you need a day to remind you to show love to someone who should be getting it every single day from you, then you need to have a word with yourself. You really, really do. So clearly I don't celebrate Valentine's Day. Listen, I'm not perfect. I don't always remember to show the love. Thankfully, my wife doesn't believe in it either, so that's good. We've got that in common. I think as well, because it's kind of not really built on anything. I'm just going to take that cynicism a little bit further and introduce some fact. Like most of these things, right? It started out as a religious festival. It actually started out as a kind of homage to priests who'd been murdered. So that's how it started, as a feast day honouring martyrs who were named St. Valentine. Sorry, yeah, that's the important bit. They were named St. Valentine. But no one knows why it's February the 14th. It's fixed by the church, but no one really knows why. No one really knows why. We have this segue from it being a feast to celebrate death to love. Some people think it's French in origin. Shakespeare mentioned it in Hamlet in the early 17th century. But yeah, there you go, Valentine's Day. Anyway, if you're doing something nice, that's boss, good for you for doing that. Going to be super expensive. Can't get a booking anywhere. Just do it a different day. Do it on the 15th. Celebrate it on the 5th. Be different, right? Celebrate difference, not difference. What a way to start the podcast. I wouldn't mind, but I had a really good weekend. Like, the weather's great. Hanging out at the cafe this morning, which I'll tell you about. Although I have to be honest, like last week. So like I counted on Friday. I've got 10 people, 10 organisations patiently waiting for in-person delivery. Some of these have been waiting for 2 years, and if you guys are listening, you're awesome. Thank you, and I can't wait to do in-person delivery. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting to do all that, I'm doing lots of virtual stuff. Obviously, that's the world of culture doesn't stop, so I'm doing lots of speeches and virtual workshops. Now, when I'm doing my in-person delivery, I was thinking back to a time just pre-COVID. I did a 2-day. I flew into a city. I did a 2-day workshop. Then I had to fly, this was in New Zealand, I had to fly another city in New Zealand on the Wednesday. And then I did another 2-day workshop on the Thursday and Friday, and then flew back to Australia late Friday night. And when, I got on the plane, I had so much energy. I had bags and bags of energy. But the virtual stuff, now I don't know whether you're finding this as well, when you're spending all day in front of a camera, it's exhausting. And I know there's a whole lack of mobility thing, and I'm one of those, I've got one of those personalities that gets energy from people, right? So I like being in a room full of people, that gives me energy, and also I get more energy when I'm moving about. So I guess that's partly it. But I'm finding, I did a session with the team last week, like a half-day session, and I needed a little nana nap after it finished. I never do that. But yeah, it's this whole... This kind of whole virtual thing is truly exhausting. Now, if you want to know more about Zoom fatigue, which is a real thing, head over to my other podcast called Culture Makers and listen to the podcast I did with Geraldine Fowville. Geraldine is leading the research into Zoom fatigue globally right now for Stanford University. It's a fascinating interview, so she can tell you more about that. And as I record that, I'm just about to start the 3rd season of Culture Makers, which is pretty exciting. So if you're listening and there's someone that you'd like to nominate to be on the show, just drop me an email, colin@colindellis.com. I'd be happy to interview them. So where am I this morning? So I'm in a place called Steam Junkies, and I've said this before about Melbourne. There's so many little coffee shops in kind of random places. So this place is on a bike path. It's like a really long bike path that goes next to a railway line headed north. So it's about a half-hour walk for me to get here this morning. It's a beautiful morning. And it's right opposite a train station called Ants Tea, which, like, if I didn't know, I'd never heard of this suburb. There's still so many suburbs I haven't heard of that are on my doorstep here in Melbourne. 6.5 million people in Greater Melbourne. It's massive place. So a train just left. So I'm recording it in the hope that another one doesn't arrive. The window is open here, so a breeze is blowing in, which is beautiful and warm, and I've got the cafe sounds in the background. I'm just having a regular old long black, nothing fancy today, no kind of coffee to tell you about. Although someone did ask me a question last week who was listening to the podcast, and they said, what's the deal when my black coffee doesn't taste great? And so, I've talked about the kind of complexity of the coffee making process, but one of the things that we learned when we were trained as baristas in, I think it was 2011 or 2012, is that it really depends on the grind of the beans and then kind of how long you run water through them. So if the grind of the beans is too fine, essentially the water runs through too quickly. And it tastes weak. It tastes a bit skinny, and skinny is the word that I use. It just tastes like water. It tastes like hot water. So that's when the grind is too fine. When the grind is too coarse, then it tastes really bitter. So the first one we call under extraction, and the second one we call over extraction. And it's all to do with the grind. So again, it's another part of the skill that baristas have got of getting the grind absolutely spot on. And I have to say, this is a fabulous long black. It's a large one as well, but it just tastes absolutely delicious. Perfect, just perfectly done. The actual hot water takes between 20 and 30 seconds. But again, that's the skill of the barista to do that. So I hope you had a great weekend, wherever you are in the world. I hope your version of crazy is sorting itself out. And I'm going to talk today about dealing with a toxic boss. As I'm wont to do from time to time, I pop on LinkedIn and just have a look what's got. Actually, I posted a picture of me on LinkedIn. I had some new profile pictures done, and obviously they're of me looking pretty schmick in all my gear, but I also noticed on our TV I've got these photos rotating, like old photos of pictures that we've taken with the kids, and it's great, you just sit there and watch the slideshow. But there was one that came up with me when I was about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 in this little tie. Anyway, so I posted the pictures on LinkedIn if you're interested. But on there was a post from a guy, and it went something like, never work for a bad boss, never work for someone who disrespects you, never work for someone who harasses you, never work for someone who interrupts you, like all of these things. And of course, great, awesome, fab, don't do that. The thing is, and I often think this, is that's not the reality for most people, that you can just go, all right, I'm getting bullied, I'm not going to work for you anymore. And so, this is a position I found myself in a couple of times in the workplace with a toxic boss. And I just couldn't down tools and just be like, right, well, I'm not going to work for you anymore, I'm going to get something else. And, despite how bad things were, it was a conversation I had with myself all of the time. You should say this, you should do this, you should do that, right? I should talk to someone about this, and of course you should. The thing is you just want to get your head down and do your job. Train just pulled in just as I was talking. Anyway, I hope you can't hear that. So it's just not as easy as that. And I see some of these posts, and they're really well-meaning, right? It's just not the reality for most people. No one's reading that on LinkedIn going, you know what, you're right, I should quit my job immediately. And so I think, what we've all got a responsibility to do is to actually help people to deal with it. Now, if you're a HR professional on the call, like, you guys need to be better at dealing with this. You really do. There have been some horror stories, and I'm not going to dig into them, because you can just go and have a look on the internet for them, about HR departments who just don't help when it comes to addressing some of these issues. And I think, in many organisations, HR turns a blind eye to poor management. It's not leadership. Don't even get me started on that. Most organisations don't have leaders at the top. They have just managers and then one or two leaders. I've mentioned this before. And I often think, so there's two things, right? It's firstly, HR, just like finance, just like IT, like everyone's got to do their job really, really well. That's how you get trusted and so on. HR's job is to protect employees. So they're agnostic. Even if they might sit on the leadership team, they're agnostic of the leadership team. It's their job to protect all employees. It's their job to make sure that, if that's their remit, right? It's their job to make sure that a safe workplace exists and that managers are being held accountable to it, because subcultures are made up of subcultures. So every manager's got to do their bit to create a great subculture, and HR are there to deal with the people that don't do that, and uncompromisingly so if they're bullies or they harass people or whatever. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, and I may have mentioned this before. In fact, I might do a podcast about this. In fact, I'm going to do my next podcast. Let me just write this down, otherwise I'll forget. So my next podcast, I'll talk about this more, is I just don't think learning and development programs are very good for managers. I still think there's this assumption that we kind of promote someone and they know how not to bully someone. They know how not to bully someone. That doesn't sound grammatically right, but you know what I mean. But they understand, this is what I need to avoid in order to harass someone, to bully someone, to place too much pressure on, to create anxiety. I don't think learning and development programs do that. I still think organisations are buying stuff off the shelf, which kind of mean well, but aren't tailored to the organisation or the individual such that people can change. And so, if you're a HR professional, that's something to think about, people and culture. But if you find yourself in this position, if you feel that you're being bullied, if you feel that you're being harassed, then obviously you have to do something about it. Otherwise, your mental health is going to suffer greatly. And according to research, depending on which research you read, kind of a quarter or even a third of people have been or are being bullied in the workplace. And there used to be this school of thought that it was like character building and something that everyone has to go through. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, no, I don't think so. That's kind of very reminiscent of a 1980s culture, maybe even an early 1990s culture, but definitely not. No one should have to do that. It should never have happened. And it doesn't matter whether it's 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, it's still way too many. And I think what we need to do is to provide people with the strategies on how to deal with that. And as I said, HR need to sort it out when it comes to the fore. So the first thing that I would say is it a question of style? I think there are many managers out there who have a pretty direct style. And by direct, I mean that they're kind of bold, they say things as they mean it. And providing it isn't surrounded by a load of profanity, the effing and the jeffing. That's the first question to ask yourself. Am I being bullied, or are they using a style that I don't appreciate? Now, in an ideal world, and this comes back to those learning and development programs, we teach managers how to communicate, because many of them are rubbish. Like, if we're honest, they're rubbish. Like empathy, we talk about empathy, but a big part of empathy is me recognising who you are and then tailoring my style. Like, we don't want people to change who they are necessarily. Well, unless they're idiots, in which case we definitely do. But we do need to change the style. That's empathy in action. I recognise you, I respect you and your personality, and I change my style accordingly. But sometimes managers, they can use a more direct style, and it might not be something that you appreciate. And, in those instances, is once you've kind of worked out what needs to be done, then it's a conversation to say, hey, listen, can we have and for safety purposes, this is something that I would often recommend gets done in a team. Where you, in a team meeting, you'd maybe bring it up and say, hey, can we talk a little bit about communication style? I think it's important for us as a team to stay connected. I think it's important for us as a team to communicate in a way that's respectful and honest, and have that acknowledgement that there are different styles. I ran a personality and communication workshop a couple of weeks back, And it's only when you're taught how to communicate properly you realise how badly you've been doing it for years, right? You know, because we learn how to communicate from our parents, who are often not the greatest role models. So that's the first question to ask yourself. Is it just a direct style that they have? Or is it threatening? Is it intimidating? If it comes with the profanity, then that's absolutely, definitely not acceptable. Are expectations being set in the right way so that you fully understand what to do? And I think that's something that everybody needs to get clear on at the start of the week. Now, the better managers will actually sit down and have one-to-ones at the start of the week and kind of lay out what needs to get done, you know, as a team and then as individuals. And it's not about the hours that get worked, it's about the outputs that are required. And then what a manager should do is kind of lay out who needs to be kind of involved in what stage, but then kind of let you get on with it. So I think, as you know, from an employee perspective, one of the things you might want to ask for if you feel that you're under pressure is getting clear on exactly what needs to get done. Now, the thing is with toxic bosses is change on a day-to-day basis. And so what you've got to be able to do is have the conversation about priorities. And so on you know, if you're finding out what's expected of you at the start of the week, you can then always say, okay, you know, as a priority call, which is more important than the other thing here. So when extra work gets put on you, then your first question is, listen, I can't do all of this. And so as you can see, this requires courage. Now, often when it's a toxic boss, it's pretty hard to do, which is why I always recommend the people who are in this position is make sure you're keeping notes. Make sure you're writing down how you feel. Make sure you're capturing the interactions between yourself and the manager. What you want to be able to do is to provide some detail to support how you've been treated. I remember one manager saying to me, "Is that you're actively encouraging people to create an audit trail of bad stuff?" I'm like, "Well, yeah. And if managers stop doing the bad stuff, then the audit trail can stop. It's really that easy. It really, really is." So you want to kind of capture those interactions, because when you're asking for a priority, because there's just no way you can do all of the work in the hours that you've got. So you have to have the courage and say, "Listen, I can't do it all. Can we either delegate something to somebody else, or else which one of these do you want me to drop, or which is least important?" And you have to stick to your guns. And courage, you know, it requires more than that initial, and we see it as confrontation and we see it as conflict, and it might feel like that, but that's okay. So you've got to go toe to toe sometimes, again in a highly respectful way. And the key thing for you here is to be the best version of yourself at all times. Because the moment that you lose control of your emotion, they've kind of broken you. Do you know what I mean? I had that with one manager. I ended up losing my temper, and then he turned that round on me. And that was the worst thing that I could have done. And it's not about weakness or any of those things. What you just want to do is stay as cool and as calm as you can. What you don't want to do is get dragged down to their level. You want to that's just not where you want to be, because at that point you're not the best version of yourself, and then there's that element inside you that's full of regret. And all of those kind of emotions that will then undermine your confidence and the way that you feel about doing your job. And then the next thing that I would suggest is that you actually try and build a relationship with the person. And I know that's going to be hard to do. You don't want. I'm not talking about being mates here. I'm not talking about being friends. I'm talking about just having a human conversation. You know, they are a human, even though they might not feel, it might not seem like it. They're a human just like you. They're a father, a mother just like you. They have kids just like you. They've got a job to do just like you. Often you don't know what's going on in their world. Not that should ever excuse some of those behaviours. But as much as you possibly can, you want to try and build a relationship with them such that it becomes easier to be honest with them about how you feel. And you need to let them know how you feel. And you want to give them a chance to be able to do something about it. And so, with one boss, I said, "Listen, I know you're under pressure. And it's hard for me to say this, but I don't find the way that you're dealing with me to be very motivating at all. I was like, oh, well, it's my job. That's not your job. It's my job, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I get it. I was like, but the way to motivate me is to not to shout at me. The way to motivate me is to calmly explain what needs to be done and then to make sure I've got all the information. I was like, listen, you might need to check in on me once or twice, and I'm going to really appreciate that you doing that, but not micromanage me. I was like, if you don't feel that I'm doing my job, then help me to do it better. Don't tell me I'm not doing it, and then do it yourself. And it required a lot of courage. My heart was pounding and my voice was cracking because I was highly emotional and was a fairly young employee. But it did change after that because, maybe I had to have one or two more conversations with him after that I remember saying thank you to him. I remember saying, hey, listen, Ian, thanks. I just want to let you know that I've noticed. And he said stuff like, oh, you're a really tough cookie, one of the toughest people that I've managed. Because I demanded more of him as a manager. It wasn't like I was missing targets. It wasn't like I was a bad human being. I perhaps just needed a bit more work given what I was doing. And so I think if you can build that relationship, it will definitely help. The last thing that I would suggest, and this is almost the last chance saloon before you escalate it, because that's the thing you have to do sometimes, is to escalate it. No one deserves to be treated like that. The last thing I'd suggest is doing stuff as a team. Now, I've joked in the past that nothing unites a team like a bad manager. I'm certainly not suggesting you get together and badmouth the manager behind the back, because then you're coming down to their level and you don't want to do that. But when you do more things as a team, you create unity. Now, obviously, you want to try and involve the manager in that. But doing those little social things that bring you together as humans, doing those social things that make it easier to be more confident, to be more courageous, doing those social things that help to build those emotional bonds so you're able to feel and act a little bit more vulnerable. These are all things that help. And then, the hope then is the manager becomes part of that and he sees what's being created. I'm using the masculine here. I do know that toxic bosses are, it's not gender specific. I do realise that. So I think as a team, if you can really build that camaraderie, and I think there's such a strength that comes in that camaraderie that helps managers sometimes to see kind of where they're going wrong. Also, as a team, you're better able to kind of come together and say, hey, listen, here's some of the things we noticed. And if all that fails, you've got to go to your HR department. You have to. You have to go to your HR department, you have to talk to them, you have to be able to produce your evidence, you have to be able to talk about how it makes you feel. You have to be solution focused, you have to think about the things that you could do differently. Because sometimes, there are people who perhaps haven't done enough to get their job done. Again, it doesn't excuse the behaviour of the manager. I just want to make that point. But ask yourself, are you being the best version of you? Living with a toxic boss can be massively stressful. It can lead to depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide. And if you ever feel those kind of feelings, please talk to someone. There are helplines and hotlines you can ring. Here in Australia we have Beyond Blue you can talk to, but make sure you talk to someone and aren't dealing with this on your own. Hope you have a fabulous day, whatever you're doing, following this podcast, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Ta-ra for now.